Praise belongs to God, before whose oneness there is no before, unless the before is He, and after whose singleness there is no after, unless the after is He. He is, and there is not with Him any before or after, above or below, closeness or distance, no how or where or when, no time or moment or duration, no manifested existence or place. He is now as He has always been. He is the one without oneness and the single without singleness. He is not composed of name and named, for His name is Him, and His named is Him, and there is no name or named other than Him. He is the apparent without appearance, and the hidden without hiddenness. I mean that He is the very existence of the letters of the names of the first and the last, the apparent and the hidden. Understand this, so as not to make the mistake of those who believe in incarnation. He is not in anything, and no thing is in Him, whether entering into Him or coming out of Him. No one sees Him except Himself. No one reaches Him except Himself, and no one knows Him except Himself. He knows Himself through Himself, and He sees Himself by means of Himself alone. No one but He sees Him. His veil is His oneness, since nothing veils Him other than Him. His own being veils Him. Because of this, the prophet, God bless him and give him peace, said, "Whoever knows their self knows their Lord." He also said, "I knew my Lord through my Lord." What the prophet pointed out is that you are not you. What the prophet pointed out is that you are not you, but you are Him, and there is no you. It is not that He enters into you, or that you enter into Him, or that He comes out of you, or that you come out of Him. That does not mean that you have being, or are qualified by this or that attribute. What is meant is that you never were, and you never will be, whether through yourself or through Him or in Him or with Him. You have neither ceased to be, nor are you existent. You are Him, and He is you, without any of these imperfections. If you know your existence in this way, then you know God, and if not, then not. Most of those who claim to know God make the knowledge of God dependent on the passing away of existence, and on the passing away of that passing away. That is clearly an error and a misconception. The knowledge of God does not require the passing away of existence, because things have no existence, and what does not exist cannot pass away. Passing away implies the prior existence of the thing that passes away. If you know yourself without existing and passing away, then you know God, and if not, then not. By making the knowledge of God dependent on the passing away of your existence and the passing away of that passing away, there is an affirmation of something other than God. The prophet said, "Whoever knows their self knows their Lord." He did not say, "Whoever annihilates their self knows their Lord. Your being, which means your independent, your separate independent being, is nothing. And whatever is nothing cannot be placed in relationship to anything else, whether it is capable of passing away or not, and whether it is existent or non-existent. If it were otherwise, he would not be alone without any associate. However, it is necessary for him to be alone without any associate, because any associate would exist through itself and not through the being of God. Then that associate would not need God, and therefore would be a second Lord, which is impossible. God has no associate, equal or like. Realization means to make something real. So there cannot be two realities. There can only be one reality. Is it ourself that is real, or is it God that is real? If there were two realities, then each of those realities would have to be limited. And if each of those realities were limited, they would have to be temporary and finite. And if each reality was temporary and finite, it would be something that appeared and disappeared. And the definition of reality is that it cannot disappear. Because if it disappears, whatever it disappears into would be more real than it. In other words, the water is more real than the wave. The wave is a temporary form of the water. The water is the reality of the wave. The wave by itself is not real. It's just a temporary appearance of the water, but the water is real. The water is its reality. So reality must be something that doesn't disappear. If it disappeared, whatever it disappeared into would be more real than it. So it would not be really real. So that's one of the definitions of reality. It cannot disappear. Another definition of reality is that it cannot change. It cannot be one thing at one moment and something else at another moment. It cannot be A at one moment and B at the other moment. Because when it was B, A would have disappeared and then it couldn't have been real. So that's another thing. Reality must never change. And the third quality of reality is that it must know itself. It cannot be known by something other than itself. If it were known by something other than itself, then it would be relative to that thing. If that thing disappeared, it would disappear. In other words, what is real must be ever present. It cannot be limited. It cannot be temporary. It cannot be finite. It cannot be known. It cannot be relative to the finite mind. So if we explore what is real in our experience of ourself, all we find is the amness of ourself, the aware being of ourself. But what is real in God? What would God's reality be made of? Could we have one reality and God have another reality? What would be the relationship between these two realities? Which would be more real? And if there was another reality apart from God's reality, if there was God's reality over here, God realization, and the reality of ourself over here, then there would be two realities, and therefore God's reality wouldn't be God, because it would be only half the picture. If God is anything, it must be everything. So self-realization must be the same as God realization. Whatever is real must be what is real about God. In fact, that's what the word God means, that which is real. What is it that is real in us? What is it that is not temporary? What is it that doesn't disappear in our own experience of ourselves? What is it that is absolutely true and unwavering, that is not dependent on the waking state or the dream state or the deep sleep state, what is absolutely unchanging in ourself, our own self-aware being. The recognition of that is God realization, is the recognition of what is real about God. The amness of ourself is the only thing that never changes or disappears. The isness or the existence of things is the only element of things that never changes or disappears. The isness of these flowers is the same as the isness of these lights, which is the same as the isness of the carpet. The isness of everything is the same, and being the common factor of all things, it is not limited by any particular things. In other words, isness or pure being is infinite or unlimited. When that is discovered in ourself, we call it self-realization. But when it is discovered to be impersonal, when it is discovered to be the reality of the world, we call it God realization. But the amness of ourself and the isness of things is the same being. When it is recognized in here, it's called self-realization. When it's recognized out there, it's called God realization. It's the same. To suggest that there is a self apart from God, a real self, to suggest that there is something real apart from God is blasphemy. It is to suggest that there are two selves, two realities, two entities, that there is God and something other than God, the self that we have realized. But this is to suggest that there is something that exists independently of God, and therefore God would not be everything, and such a God would not be God. If God is anything, God must be everything. So no, self-realization and God realization are two names for the same recognition. There's no doubt about that. Let's start with a conventional point of view in which it is believed that there is a world out there made out of stuff called matter, which is viewed by our mind. So we believe, I perceive the world, and we believe that our perception of the world is a pretty good indication of the way the world actually is. In other words, if we were not perceiving the world, it would still look exactly the same as it looks to us if we were perceiving it. So the first step we take is to recognize that all we know of the world, and by the world I'm not talking in the abstract, I mean this room. This room, your current experience of the world is this room. So we start by understanding that all we know of this room is our current perception. Yes, for instance, if you were to fall asleep now, perception would come to an end and the room would vanish. So we can't be sure that we are having a perception of this room. We can only be sure that we're having a perception. The of this room is presumed. Okay. We presume that there is a room, or indeed a world, outside perception. But in fact, nobody has ever come in contact with the world outside their five sense perceptions: seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. So instead of saying there is a perception of the world, it would be more accurate just to say there is a perception.
Okay.
Are you with me so
Yes.
far?
Yes.
Every perception that you have is known. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
So at any moment there is the knowing of your perception. Could you ever have a perception independent of knowing?
No.
If you were to remove knowing from your current perception, what would remain of your perception?
Nothing.
Nothing. It's like in the previous step, if we remove perception from the world, what would remain of our experience of the world? Nothing.
Nothing.
So we can't even be sure that there is an independent object called perception, because all we know of that perception is knowing.
Knowing, okay.
So in fact, the only substance present in perception is knowing or consciousness. Yes? If you were to touch the stuff that perception is made of, perception is obviously made out of mind stuff. Yeah? It's not made out of anything solid. If you were to try to touch now your current perception, what would you touch? What's the stuff that you would touch?
Nothing to touch. It's just
Sorry?
vacuum, empty place, space.
Yes, but there is something. A perception is not nothing.
Okay.
There is something there. A perception is made of something. It has some reality to it. It has some substance to it. But and you are experiencing perception now.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are experiencing it, you must be experiencing the stuff it is made of. Yes?
Yes.
So what is the stuff that perception is made of?
Is that the consciousness?
Perfect consciousness, knowing or consciousness.
Okay.
So actually, if we look at our experience of anything,
Mm-hmm.
and we go very deeply into it, make this exploration that we've just made, the only substance we find in experience is consciousness or knowing.
Okay.
So just as it's not a perception of the world, but it is just perception, so it is not the knowing of a perception, it is just knowing.
Okay.
So when we reduce the world to perception, we reduce matter to mind. And when we reduced perception to knowing, we reduce mind to consciousness.
Okay.
And then if you hold that understanding and now go back to any experience you like, but remain with this understanding that knowing or consciousness is the stuff out of which experience is made, you will see that whatever you encounter in your experience is made only of the knowing of it.
Yes, it makes sense, and I'm getting it, I'm understanding it. But when you go back into the real world and back to my office
Well, when you say go back into the real world, I'm talking about the real world. The real world is the world made out of consciousness. The imaginary world, what you refer to as the real world, is the world made out of stuff called matter that nobody has ever found. It is pure imagination. It is the imaginary world.
Okay.
The real world is the real world that we actually experience. And if we look at the experience, nobody now is experiencing anything other than consciousness. Can anybody now point to anything in their experience that is made out of anything other than knowing? Have any of you ever experienced anything? Or could you ever experience anything that was made out of anything other than knowing or consciousness? That is the real world. Another way to represent it would be, yes, that the apparent solidity of the object would become more and more transparent. If you wanted to represent it in a visual way, you could do this in a very nice way with computer technology, and holograms. You could represent the apparent solidity of the world made out of stuff called matter gradually dissolving, and to show that their substance was made out of something transparent and alive and knowing and infinite, not something dead, solid, inert and finite. It's not the object that dissolves, it's the objectness of the object that dissolves. And don't be satisfied with occasional glimpses of this after meditation. Like right now, there is the experience of seeing, yes? In fact, your only knowledge of the world, by knowledge I mean experience, is seeing. It's not quite true, you're hearing and touching it, but 99% of the world is appearing to you as the experience of seeing. The experience of seeing is known. There is the knowing of that experience. So there is seeing, which is the form of the world, it's your only knowledge of the world, and there is the knowing of it. Now, what is the relationship in your experience between seeing and the knowing of it?
They're the same.
They're the same. So all this world that we are now seeing is made of, in your current experience, is knowing. Right now, all you are knowing of a world is the knowing of seeing. The only substance present in this experience of the world is knowing. It's not an extraordinary experience that you have for a few moments after meditation each morning. It's actually your current and lasting experience. It's actually what everyone is experiencing all the time. It's not possible to know anything other than knowing. But thought and feeling have overlaid the experience of pure knowing with so many ideas. The primary idea is that knowing is located in and identical to the body. And that makes it seem that the world is made out of something other than myself, that is other than knowing. And the name we give to that other than myself, or other than knowing, is matter. Dead, inert stuff that is separate from me, other than me. But that is not our experience. All anybody ever knows of the world is the knowing of it, and that knowing is their own infinite self. So it's not what we see doesn't change, it's the way we see that changes. And the way we see seems to change what we see. The appearance stays the same, but the appearance is no longer mistaken for the reality. And because we see the reality in the appearance, our relationship to the appearance changes. Maya is the appearance. Ignorance is to mistake the appearance for reality. It's ignorance that goes, not Maya. When the subject-object relationship collapses, the separate me in here and the separate object, other or world out there, when these apparent two collapse, it is felt as joy, ananda, peace, in relationship to people, love, in relationship to objects, beauty. These are all words for the same experience, the collapse of the subject-object relationship. When sat and chit, when being and consciousness are realized as one, the third element of reality shines, ananda, happiness. When what I essentially am, consciousness, chit, and what it essentially is, existence, are seen to be one and the same, then this third element of experience, peace or happiness or joy, shines. Sat, Chit, Ananda. When you reach God, that is, when you know yourself in a way that is beyond all condition, you know that you are Him, and you did not know before whether you were Him or other than Him. When knowledge comes upon you, you know that it is through God that you know God, not through yourself. Most of those who know, who think that they know themselves and their Lord, and that think that they are free from the bonds of existence, declare that the way can only be travelled by passing away, by the passing away of their own existence. That is because they do not understand the saying of the prophet, and believing themselves to be free of polytheism, they allude sometimes to the negation of existence, that is, to the passing away of existence, to the passing away of the separate self, and sometimes to the annihilation or to extinction. All these expressions are unadulterated polytheism, because whoever accepts that there could be anything other than Him which is subsequently capable of passing away, affirms that there is something other than Him. And whoever affirms that is a polytheist. If someone says, you point out that your knowledge of yourself is the knowledge of God, but the one who knows their self is other than God. So how can that which is other than God know God and reach union with Him? The answer is, whoever knows their self knows that their being is not their being, nor other than their being, but that they are the very being of God, without their being becoming the being of God, or entering into God, or coming out of Him, and without their being existing along with God or in God. They see their being as it was before coming into being, without the need of passing away, effacement. For the passing away of something implies that it was previously existent, and that in turn implies that it exists by itself and not by the power of God, which is clearly impossible. It is evident that the knowledge that the knower has of their self is the knowledge that God has of Himself, because their self is no other than He. To summarize, the existence of things is His existence, without them existing. But do not fall into confusion, and do not let these illusions lead you to imagine that God is created. One of those who know has said, the Sufi is uncreated. Finally, you need to know that the seer and the seen, the one who finds and what is found, the knower and the known, the creator and the creator, the perceiver and the perceived are one. He sees, knows, and perceives his being by means of his being alone, beyond any manner of sight, knowledge, and perception, and without the existence of the form of sight, knowledge, and perception. Just as his being is beyond all condition, so the vision, knowledge, and perception which he has of himself are without condition. If someone asks, you affirm God, and you deny the existence of everything else, so what are these things that you see? The answer is this. These words are for those who see nothing other than God. We have no discussion with those who do see something other than God, for they see only what they see. Whoever knows their self sees nothing except God, but whoever does not know their self does not see God. Each receptacle only exudes what is in it. May God grant us success in what He loves, and in what satisfies Him, in word and deed, knowledge and practice, light and guidance. He has power over everything, and is able to respond to every request. There is no power or ability except in God, the sublime, the magnificent.